Welcome to Measuring Success Right, the official podcast of the Marriott Student Review, a podcast for students by students, where we connect the leaders of tomorrow with the issues of today.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Measuring Success Right. I'm your host, Tim Kelleher. Today's guest is Sierra Flake from the Ballard Brief. Sierra calls DuPont, Washington home despite moving around consistently due to her military family. She is an exercise science major here at Brigham Young University and is in her senior year. Next semester, she will be studying at the BYU Jerusalem Center. After graduating, Sierra hopes to pursue a Master of Science in Physician Assistant Studies and work as a PA in global and international medicine. For hobbies, she enjoys climbing and long-distance running. Sierra also won second place in the Ballard Brief Summit and just recently returned from Nepal. So Sierra, thank you for being with us here today.
Thanks, Tim. I'm excited to be here.
So I understand you just recently got back from Nepal. What were you doing there?
I worked at a healthcare center that is about an hour out of Kathmandu. There's actually a study abroad here at BYU where they take a group up there, and they usually spend just a couple of days at this healthcare center, but I spent an entire month there. I also didn't go with the group. I went by myself, and that was eye-opening because if I would have gone with the group, I definitely wouldn't have been able to make the friendships with the people there that I did. I showed up, and basically I flew to Kathmandu. There was this guy who's BYU's contact with this healthcare center. He came and picked me up from the airport, drove me up to the healthcare center, and just dropped me off and was like, all right, bye. And there was some previous discussion about what I would be doing there, but then when I got there, they were kind of unsure about what we were going to be doing together. And one of the reasons why I even sought out this healthcare internship was because it was supposed to be centered in maternal health care, which is what my Ballard Brief is about. And so my Ballard Brief is more about, my Ballard Brief is focused in Sub-Saharan Africa, but I figured that rural areas would have some similar factors. So I thought that going to Nepal would give me some insight that would kind of relate to my research, so I was excited about going out there. Not exactly what I expected, but the two main things that I just really want to point out from that experience that was awesome was just it became a lot more personal for me, being able to go there and really being vulnerable in a state where I was there to learn from these people, and obviously I wanted to help, but it wasn't like I came with a big group and a big idea. Like, I was more there just to observe and to learn from them and to help and to meet them where they were at and help them where they needed help. And then the second thought was I was kind of a liaison for some people who were planning on coming later to implement some projects they wanted to bring into this healthcare center to try to make it more productive for these people, to bring in more patients and provide more resources. And it seemed like they were really stuck in this idea of like how they were going to put together this program and these resources that they wanted to bring to the healthcare center, that from my perspective and these conversations I was having with the employees there, the really wasn't needed for the healthcare center at the point that it was at. That they kind of needed some other things, and we were just trying to skip some steps. So it was interesting seeing that, because I feel like it's one thing trying to think about how to make change and implement this international aid from a conference room in the United States where we're talking about problems and solutions, but then actually being there and seeing what's needed is like totally different.
Yeah, I can imagine. I bet it sounds like an amazing experience and like a great opportunity to apply and see firsthand the stuff that you really explored in your Ballard Brief, which is awesome. I want to start out a little bit with the Ballard Brief. So how did you first find out about the Ballard Brief?
It was through the Do Good Better class. They have a paper you need to write called the issue brief, and it's basically the first rough draft of your Ballard Brief. That's what you submit, or actually, you don't have to go through the Do Good Better class in order to write a Ballard Brief, but I did. And they told me, well, now that you've written this issue brief for our class, if you want to turn it into a Ballard Brief, you can submit it to the Ballard Center, and they'll pair you up with an editor, and you can get it published.
Awesome. And what interested you about the Ballard Brief? What was it that really caught your attention?
Honestly, I think it was the challenge of writing a research paper that was going to be published. It just sounded really cool. And I thought it would be pushing me outside my comfort zone in terms of my writing abilities. So it was exciting.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that it did, that it was a challenge?
100%. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. But I'm sure it was a great experience and taught you a lot about writing and your writing style. Is there any advice you would give to people in that kind of situation where, you just go for it even when it's something maybe you're not used to doing?
Great question. I think you just have to keep going for it, really, because sometimes when you're outside of your comfort zone, you're like, whoa, this sounded a lot better when I was in my comfort zone and I was just thinking about it, and now I'm like outside of my comfort zone, I'm trying this new thing, and it just feels really intimidating and a lot harder than you maybe thought it was going to be. But I feel like that's when you just have to keep pushing through, and then you get to the end and you're like, whoa, I can't believe I just did that. But then in my mind, I kind of imagine my comfort bubble, and I'm like, every time I go outside of like what I know, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that's a good goal for people to have.
Yeah, great. So you've explained a little bit about your rough draft, and then it eventually turned into a Ballard Brief. Can you explain more about what the Ballard Brief is?
The Ballard Brief is a research paper that analyzes a social issue. Usually it's focused in a particular area of the world, and you write about the contributing factors to the issue, the consequences that are caused because of the social issue, and then the best practices that have been put in place to solve this issue.
Okay. And kind of going off of that, they also have the Ballard Summit.
Yes.
Will you explain that to us?
Yeah, so the Ballard Summit is kind of like a TED Talk type event that they choose a couple of Ballard Briefs or Ballard Brief writers to come and give presentations on their Ballard Briefs.
Awesome.
And it's a competition.
It's a competition,
yes,
and you won second.
I did, and it's funny because I was actually second alternate. I wasn't even going to be a part of the summit, and then
wow.
They called me 2 days before and said, we had a dropout, can you come in? And I was like, sure. And so I did, and then won second place. So that was exciting,
wow.
Really exciting.
Yeah, what a great story. That's awesome. So now let's jump into your topic. First off, how did you decide on your topic?
I am studying exercise science. I want to be a PA, like you talked about in my intro. And so I wanted to pick something that had to do with global healthcare. And as I was just Googling stuff, Sub-Saharan Africa just kept popping up. And I feel like it's pretty well known that Sub-Saharan Africa has problems with healthcare and receiving healthcare. But in looking at these stats of Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of maternal deaths and children deaths and these different statistics I was looking at, I was like, but why? And so I guess for one reason I picked it because I thought since it seemed to be such a big topic as I was looking up global healthcare. I thought there would be lots of information for me to research, so that would make the research a little bit easier. And then the second reason is I was just kind of curious of like what really is causing this issue in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, diving a bit deeper into the roots of it.
Yeah.
What is the precise meaning of maternal health care?
Maternal health care is providing health services to women during pregnancy, childbirth, and postnatal care, which also includes providing health care to, it mostly focuses on the woman, but it is connected to the infant, since the infant is obviously like connected to the woman during pregnancy, and then childbirth pretty close associated, and then postnatal care, if the mother is healthy, it helps the child be more healthy. So it's basically promoting health primarily for the mother, but also for the infant during those periods of maternity.
And to get into the Ballard Brief, you really have to do quite a bit of research. It's a research article.
Yeah.
What was the research process behind this paper?
It's a lot of reading. You really just have to like look at a bunch of different articles and try to make connections. And honestly, I feel like that is what you do for every research paper, honestly. And I just did a lot of scholar papers off of Google. And it's interesting because since I picked such a big area, a lot of them were just kind of like literature reviews based off of multiple other more specific studies on just like a specific country. And then they just kind of made the connections between the countries.
We've talked a little bit about why you decided on this topic, but why is it important to you personally? And in a broader sense, why is it important to the world to hear about this topic?
I think personally, I think that life is so valuable, and to think that there are places in the world where people are not getting to live as long as others because they don't have access to resources that I have in my own personal life is tough for me. And I want to know, I don't want to just know that there are people that are struggling. I want to know why, because I feel like it empowers me to be an influence in that, or at least to be aware of it, so that if there is an opportunity for me to help, then I'm not ignorant of why those problems are there and why those people are struggling. And I think that affects the world as a whole, because as we're all humans, we all need the same things to survive. And we all experience the same emotions, even though we live in different circumstances or we have different lives. And so with that being said, I feel like we all need to work together as humanity in order to overcome these social issues. And if we just kind of look inward at ourselves and make sure that we're okay, then we're going to miss things, and we forget that overall everybody is connected. And so if we only look at ourselves, then those problems that are affecting other people, I feel like eventually boil down to affect us.
How did you first discover that you were passionate about this topic?
In the beginning, to be honest, I picked this topic. I said that as I was Googling, it kind of popped up a lot. So I was like, oh, I think there's going to be a lot of resources to be able to use for my research. And so I picked it because I didn't want a really difficult topic to write about, especially because I had to write this for a class. And I just wanted to make sure that I could, get the paper done in the semester with everything else I was doing. But then as I decided to make it a Ballard Brief and I really got into it, I think one of the reasons I really loved this topic is because I realized that this problem of lack of maternal health care in Sub-Saharan Africa is like really deep. There's just a lot of issues that contribute to why it's an issue. And I thought it was going to be kind of clear cut of like, oh, like because of A, B, and C, people in Sub-Saharan Africa lack maternal health care. But seeing that, like, there were a lot of other factors and problems that went into it, it made the problem really messy, which was kind of frustrating for me, but in also some ways made me a lot more dedicated to the issue, because there wasn't super clear research that just said, oh, we figured it out. This is what it is. This is the solution, which means that it's still a problem. It still needs advocation and help to work through. And so I was excited about being an advocate and kind of trying to dig through the mess to figure out what really is the core of this problem, which I still quite haven't figured out. But it was exciting.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what advice would you give to people maybe in a similar circumstance who are trying to figure out what they're passionate about or discovering their passion?
I would say sometimes on your road of discovering your passion, there's going to be moments where you're not passionate about what you thought you were passionate about. And it's because often in life we have to do mundane things that are not exciting. Or sometimes you're going to hit like roadblocks that you weren't expecting. But I feel like sometimes those things are what really test you in how much do you care about this topic or this thing that you're pursuing or that you claim that you're passionate about. And sometimes I feel like it's trying to overcome the mundane or the roadblocks that really help like strengthen that passion inside of you. And you recognize things that in yourself that you didn't see before. Like for me, I chose being a PA because my dad's a doctor and I appreciated his example. But I had no idea that I was as passionate about medicine as I am until I started taking more anatomy classes and experienced more time in the hospital doing these things and imagining myself as a healer with people who are struggling with health issues. And I just thought about so many aspects of healthcare that I didn't even think about before, but that have added to my passion now. And so I think that's how passions work, is as you stick with them and as you like kind of dive into the mess, like I was talking about with my Ballard Brief, you become more passionate about it and it becomes more a part of you.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. We've talked a lot about the circumstances surrounding your Ballard Brief, but I want to dive in a little bit more into some of the research here. So I have a statistic here that I'm going to read. According to the United Nations, the chances of a woman dying in childbirth in Sub-Saharan Africa is 1 out of 16, compared to 1 out of 2,800 for women in the developed world. Could you explain a little bit more of this statistic to us?
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy statistic, like 1 in 16 versus 1 in 2,800. It's a huge jump. I think the first thing to look at when at the statistic is that what is trying to define what exactly is the developed world, right? And so there isn't, or I would say my definition is that the developed world is stable while the undeveloped world is unstable. The most common factor that I saw in describing an undeveloped country is poverty. They have high rates of poverty versus developing countries or developed countries have lower rates of poverty. So going back to that definition I said before, where it really kind of comes down to stability, poverty affects a lot of different things or is affected by things such as like government or healthcare and education. And so since all those things are kind of interwoven, that's why I feel like a better definition would be developed countries have more stability and undeveloped countries have less stability, especially in these 5 categories, which would be government, economy, education, human rights, and healthcare. since my Ballard Brief is about healthcare, how could I have forgotten everybody? Anyways, so that's what I would say is kind of the top 5. And you see that in Sub-Saharan Africa, they struggle in all 5 of those categories. And I dive deeper into it in my Ballard Brief, but you really see how these social issues that are involved in poverty, government, education, human rights, and healthcare all kind of interweave together and plays a big role in why in Sub-Saharan Africa they lack access to maternal health care and therefore have a higher chance of maternal mortality. And also neonatal mortality. Neonatal mortality is death within the first month of life. And so a lot of these babies are making it past 1 year or 1 month of age, which is really, really sad. And so the fact that there are so many people, so many babies and mothers dying, I mean, really, there needs to be changes made. But it's not just in fixing the healthcare, it's in fixing those other things and providing more stability to these countries.
Yeah. So essentially unstable versus stable. Unstable would increase your chances of a negative consequence with your childbirth versus stable. You pretty much know how it's going to go, right? Your childbirth.
Exactly.
Great. What steps are being taken to currently remedy the situation in Sub-Saharan Africa?
I think that the most influential practice being put forward is the Millennium Development Goals. They were set in 2000, and basically there was a group of governments that got together and decided they wanted to start making a change in these social issues that were affecting large regions of the world. And one of them was to improve maternal health care. They wanted to provide 100%, they wanted all of these countries to have 100% access to maternal health care, and they wanted to decrease maternal mortality rate. So good news is that in Sub-Saharan Africa, since the Millennium Development Goals have been put in place, maternal mortality rate has decreased by almost half, which is awesome. But they didn't quite meet the goal that they had set. And so then they've come up with the sustainability. They came up with a second set of goals, kind of bouncing off of the first ones. There's sustainability goals. And basically those have just kind of continued to help with increasing awareness of lack of maternal health care in Sub-Saharan Africa, which has led to projects to bring in more resources and more trainings to increase the amount of people who are skilled birth attendants. That way there's more people, more professionals at births, and then there's less chance for emergency situations without help. There are more resources to these mothers and just better care provided overall.
Great. And with the second set of goals, are they essentially revisions of the Millennium Development Goals, or are there changes, significant changes, or are they kind of the same?
I would say they're kind of the same. To be honest, I didn't dive into the goals as much as just kind of look at how the goals specifically refer to maternal health care. But the biggest difference is the Millennium Development Goals has a specific goal for improving maternal health care, while the sustainability goals just has a goal that talks about more generally improving healthcare, and under that goal, they include maternal health care.
Okay, interesting. So it's a bit broader in the second part than it was in the first one.
Yes.
Interesting. How can a person get involved in improving maternal health care in Sub-Saharan Africa?
I think the biggest thing that you can do is to become more aware. The Millennium Development Goals, I feel like their biggest strength was advocacy for this issue and making more people aware of it. And that's what started these programs or inspired people to start doing things to bring more aid into Sub-Saharan Africa and other places that needed help with maternal health care. And so for Sub-Saharan Africa specifically, You can help by learning more about why Sub-Saharan Africa is struggling. Maybe you could read my Ballard Brief, or you can look up other articles. And I think that's really the first step for anybody who wants to make change and wants to learn more about a specific social issue, is just take the time to learn about it.
Well, we've talked quite a bit about your Ballard Brief, which is extremely interesting and super insightful. But we'd also like to talk a little bit about you and your personal goals and your own progression. How do you balance your work and research responsibilities with your family and religion responsibilities?
Balance, I feel like it's a constant discussion that I have with myself and my family and my friends all the time, because I feel like I'm always trying to figure out how to find balance. And my thought is that I think it's because I'm a science major, but I think about it a little bit more like equilibrium or homeostasis, which means that it's dynamic. Like, it's going to be constantly changing. You don't necessarily find a balance and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I found it, we're good. There's constant changes in our lives, and that is good. And I think that's just part of life, is constantly making the adjustments to refine the balance. So the question of how do I do that is persistence, is just always being, or not necessarily always, but being patient with myself, not giving up, and continuing to make those little adjustments every day, even if it's like every hour.
In your life, how do you measure success?
I measure success by how well I fulfill my potential. And I discover more of my potential every day, I feel like. So in some ways that might sound confusing, because you're like, well, how can you define your success if you're continually like redefining success? But I think that it is a step-by-step or day-by-day process, where my success today is going to be different than my success tomorrow, because I'm constantly learning and progressing. And so I'm successful if I am my best self and I try my best today. And tomorrow that's probably going to be better than I was today. But it's because of today that tomorrow I'm able to have greater success and be better than I was today.
Well, thank you, Sierra, for sharing that. And thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to this week's podcast episode. Please check out our other episodes, and we'll see you next week.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you never miss an episode. Be a friend and tell a friend about measuring success right.
This podcast is a project of the Marriott Student Review at Brigham Young University. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Marriott Student Review, or online at marriottstudentreview.org.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect official policy or position of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.